Hey everyone, Heather Ashamara here. I was hoping to bring in Serena Hicks today, but I just checked my email and realized we didn't finish the final yes. So I'm gonna just, oh, there she is, yay! So good. All right, I'm pulling Serena in, yay!
Hello.
Hi, love.
Hi.
Excellent. So I just checked and I'm like, oh my gosh, we didn't do the final confirm.
But no, that's what I was like, where's my email?
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, I have to go to the email and press the button. So hello.
Yes. Yay. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, hon. I know that you're launching and getting ready to start anti-racism school. And so I'm really grateful you're able to join us today.
It is my pleasure. It is my pleasure.
Excellent.
Yeah. I have some notes to share, but I don't know if you already told everyone. I'm still thrilled that I was in your first Warrior Goddess class facilitator program.
Yes, which I love. So I'll just do this is the briefest intro of Serena, and I'm just, again, so grateful that you're able to join us today. So Serena, and I didn't know you were in the first one, so I love that, is one of our Warrior Goddess facilitators, and met her originally in Austin when I lived in Austin and when we had a center in Austin. So, and you're doing just such good work. So that's why I was so inspired to reach out to you when you first messaged me and said, I'm stepping into this. And I was like, yes, go girlfriend, how can I help you? So I'm gonna give you the floor, let you share whatever you wanna share with everyone. I'll be hanging out in the background watching comments. And whenever you're ready, I'll jump back in and we can close the conversation or answer questions or see where we wanna go.
Cool, thank you.
All right, sweetheart, you're welcome.
I'm Serena Hicks. I'm still in Austin, and I loved finding Warrior Goddess training. It was actually in 2015, which is so funny because it feels like so long ago, and yet it's 5 years. Thank you, Heather Ash, when you were talking about me stepping into anti-racism work. I am not one of the many glorious, wonderful anti-racism educators and teachers who've sort of been in this field forever. My background is really teaching and coaching, and I am biracial, half Black, half white. So when this moment in time really started to unfold, what I really noticed and why I felt called to step into this and step forward was growing up half Black and half white. So my mother's white, my father's Black. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I think one of the unique points of view that it afforded me, and we'll just call it that, was really noticing, because kids, of course, notice everything, like the difference if I were having an experience with my mother versus having an experience with my Black father. Shopping in service merchandise, young people, that was this really big sort of store, and they had like everything, including jewelry and vacuums, and I don't know, it was not really a department store, but like I remember being in the jewelry section with my dad and like noticing, like feeling unwelcome, for lack of better terminology. And yet, like, my mother, who's a very beautiful blonde woman, anytime we were in the jewelry section at service merchandise, they were all like, how can we help? And so when it felt to me, still does, which I appreciate, like there was this huge awakening of white women and white people, sort of like never before, saying, whoa, wow, I didn't really know that so much of this was possible in other people and in our country, and so on and so forth. It felt like an awakening, and I felt really called to step forward, because one thing that I believe as a coach is education alone won't save us. If you've ever had the chance to participate in a Warrior Goddess training event or like do the work in community, then you certainly know the experience. Like reading and taking in the information is absolutely, I think, a very important first step in any transformation that we're making. But education alone rarely gets us exactly where we're going. I like to make the joke that if it did, we'd all be at our ideal body weight and have like the most perfect relationships and like make the most perfect meals. It's one thing if I read a cookbook, it's another thing to actually like put it into action and practice. And so that was why I felt really called to come into anti-racism work education as a coach, so that, and I created Anti-Racism School providing an education on how we got here, which I'll talk very briefly about, but also then hold a safe, sacred, shame-free container. I'm like super anti-shame. Shame is how we shut down. Shame is what, like, you know, those voices that tell us how we're doing it wrong and we'll never get it right and it's too hard. Or more importantly, I think shame just shuts us down because it triggers the terror, like panic response. And then we freeze from that fight, flight, or freeze response. And when we freeze, we are not open-hearted. When we are closed and shut down, we are not able to hear, we are not able to hold space, and we are not able to actually tune into that wise women voice that's inside of us that might be able to guide us. So I created the Anti-Racism School as a container, ultimately a safe space for some education on ultimately the anti-Blackness that I always talk about. If you were born in the United States, and actually it's a global issue, but I'm here in Texas and we love to be very focused on ourselves here. So I'll just talk about the United States and the experience of us being in the United States. It's like in this culture, there's an anti-Black racism that we're ultimately just born into. And it's like most people I know didn't sign up for it. Most people I know, white people, brown people, Black people, nobody signed up to drink the poison that is sort of the systematic and institutionalized racism. So even though none of us signed up for this unwanted racism, we do have to actually opt out, like proactively, much like one can choose to opt out of sexism, actually all discrimination, period. I think it goes against human nature to want that sort of illusion and separateness. At the same time, the way human brains work is basically human brains try to like figure out what is safe, what is unsafe. And human brains are imperfect things. I think that's one reason our heart and keeping our heart and body wisdom involved in all processes of transformation and growth is so important. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about and make some recommendations. Let me make sure, hold on, that I've got all the things here. For anyone who is interested for personal or professional, which I argue it's always the same, but for anyone who wants to do this anti-racism work in a container, antiracismschool.com explains the course. Literally, it's a course with coaching and community. It technically starts today. We've got our first call tomorrow, but if you go to antiracismschool.com, there's information. If you are in a self-study or prefer do-it-yourself style, I would suggest these books in this order. White Fragility explains the insidious, again, institutionalized racism that nobody I know signed up for. It also talks about why exactly like saying, I don't see any color is disruptive, and it's something that we're not into, period, sort of now, because A, it's not true. We all see each other's colors if you are actually a sighted person. And B, it's sort of refusing to see someone. And I think one of the most honorable things that we do as humans is we see each other. Like when we say, I love you, for anyone who ever watched Avatar and loved it. I love how in the movie Avatar, they say, I see you. And I think, isn't that just another way of saying, I love you is I see you? So the concept of not seeing color or being colorblind isn't inclusive and isn't necessarily loving, because it's ultimately saying, oh, I don't see anything wrong with you, which sort of suggests what I'm not acknowledging, not seeing sort of is wrong. Much like if somebody were in a wheelchair, I would not, say like, I don't see your wheelchair. I don't see it. Of course I see it. I am a sighted person. I was gonna say the gift of sight, but that is certainly up for debate. And so like, to say like, oh, I don't see it wouldn't be kindness or connect. It's something I would encourage. And I think all of the great leaders encourage is, celebrating our differences, seeing and celebrating, and not just as an act of a thing to do for HR, but truly like we are all different. We are all bringing something different to the table. An analogy that I like to make about that, so my boyfriend was talking about, well, yeah, obviously when you do a Trivia Pursuit, like when you're playing Trivial Pursuit, you want a diverse team. I used to be very into playing, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but basically it's like you go to a bar back when we safely used to do that all the time. It was years ago, but it was like a trivia night. And I was on a team and everyone else's strengths were different than mine. And I remember feeling a little bit out of place because it's like world history and science, chemistry, and all these different, each sort of segment was, I didn't have a lot to contribute. And then it came to the time where the segment was exactly 10 questions. And the questions were, you'd listen to music, and then you had to say if it was Michael McDonald or if it was Michael Bolton. Some of you are laughing because if you, like me, are super into music and can totally differentiate between Michael McDonald and Michael Bolton's voices, this was like my moment to shine. What was so fun was everyone else on my team was like, are you sure? How can you tell? And I was like, 100,000% sure. Boom, 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 boom. So that is my diversity example, not speaking in race, but speaking in any space that like we didn't win, but our team did really well because we all brought different things. And what I want to point out is like, if we're talking about flipping that into like, what if it was a hiring situation? Maybe someone wouldn't necessarily have wanted to hire me because, again, such differences, like my weaknesses were their strengths and vice versa. And yet we made a great team because we weren't all strong in the same ways. We all brought different points of view. And I think that that's an analogy that I want to tie back into it's not about being colorblind or not seeing color, not pretending that we don't see color, and not pretending that our country specifically doesn't have a rather oppressive and horrific past, so much as holding space for the truth and sifting through it to find out how we move forward more connected as humans, how we are good ancestors to the youngs and the people that are going to come after us, and also how we are good to ourselves, not just good ancestors. Another thing that I think is very helpful, specifically coming from White Fragility, is, the book, White Fragility, is that it talks about, Robin talks so much about, for those who are born white and have moved through the world from a place of being white, how it can feel like a shock to the system to consider systematic or personal responsibility in racism because, number one, when the whole point of view has been from your point of view. So if you always saw yourself on TV and in the movies and on the front of magazines, if you rarely walk into a room and you're the only person or one of the few people of that color, of that race, if you don't, like as a normal part of your day-to-day, look around the room and sort of scan it, for lack of better terminology, to make sure you're welcome there, that it's sort of a safe space, then like that's part of the privilege of being white, is you've always seen yourself reflected back. Privilege does not mean that white families have not also had challenges. I think one of them, and I'm talking very top line here, but I think it's helpful to remember that the 13th Amendment, and I would say if you are looking for something, for some sort of history, just to me, it's putting the puzzle pieces together. There's a documentary called 13th, like the number 13. It's literally a documentary about the 13th Amendment to our Constitution. So it's called 13th. It's free on YouTube. It's also available on Netflix. So the documentary is called 13th. It's about the 13th Amendment. And it specifically explains how when enslaved people were set free in the 13th Amendment, there was a loophole that specifically talked about, all men are created equal, everyone is free, unless you're a criminal. So when slaves were set free, there was then this, okay, you're free, but as you can all imagine, it's not like there was an abundance of jobs or eager employers who were suddenly happy to say, I'm so sorry about when I enslaved you yesterday, but here's a paycheck. That wasn't available. And I remember a part of the movie is like talking about how as the enslaved people were set free, at the exact same time, there were all these notices. There can be no loitering, which of course is literally standing around. There can be no congregating on military bases. So imagine being cool. I don't have to be enslaved and work for free all the time. And I don't have to worry about my spouse or children being sold away from me. That's great. Except Now I don't have anywhere to live. Where will I make my money and earn? And if I'm caught standing around, I can be arrested. So thus ultimately began, and what the documentary demonstrates so clearly is almost a pipeline from enslaved people to a prison system. And then, of course, most of you who are listening are familiar with the systematic inequalities as far as Black and brown people not getting access to higher education, not getting homeowner loans. And then when you think about the lack of generational wealth that gets handed down, certainly on the white side of my family, people have done well. And when they pass away, they hand over wealth, which is obviously an advantage, especially when you think about it over and over. So again, I feel like it's so funny because I can't see your comments. So it's funny because I'm like, I hope this is landing and I hope that this is helpful. White privilege definitely does not mean that there's not been challenges for white people. It means systematically having more access to higher education, to loans, less people in prison. Again, the loophole of the 13th Amendment. It's a bitter pill to take, my friends. When I watched that documentary, which I think is so beautifully done, it was time very well spent. And again, it's literally free on YouTube. So if you'd like to get educated, that is available for you. It is an hour and a half. When I was in college at the University of Texas, I took an African-American culture course. And when I watched 13th, I remember thinking, I spent 6 months in Premier University learning what ultimately, many years later, Ava DuVernay would get into a 90-minute documentary. So I highly recommend that. Let me think. What are some of the questions I've been hearing? What to do? So especially if you're committed to an anti-racist education, let's talk about just a couple things maybe not to do. Resist the temptation to really lean on, if you have Black and brown friends, like it's helpful. Let me suggest that you would say, you know, I'm interested in learning. Would you grant me the opportunity to know more about your experience? But it should be a question, because there is what we call free emotional labor. Telling our stories isn't always comfortable. And as a person of color, I can assure you, lots of white people don't actually want to hear the story. So you're ultimately asking someone to share a piece of their heart. And if you are not 100% committed to hearing what they want to offer you, even when you're uncomfortable, because I think it would be a very healthy thought to just honor that, like, we are taught not to talk about race, just like we are taught not to talk about money, which I think is not an accident. And by that, I mean silence always favors the oppressor. And for those of us who are old enough to remember working in jobs in corporate America, of which I no longer do, but we were always taught, like, don't ask, you know, what someone else makes in your position, and we were never supposed to talk about money. And I think, well, of course, because that protected the bosses at the very top. We found out two of us were in the same position and making really different salaries, like that threatens the people who are in the top positions. And again, especially when we're talking about racism, I am assuming every one of our ancestors is well-meaning, and everyone who's bothering to listen to this talk certainly wants connection and humanity and believes in a future without racism. But I always love the phrase, in order to clean the house, first you need to see the dirt so that you can clean it out. When it comes to racism, much like when it comes to some of our issues with money, talking about it and allowing ourselves to hold space for the huge discomfort and all of our feelings is absolutely step one and really powerful work. So if, as a white identifying person, you are wanting to connect with a Black or brown friend of yours, to talk about their experiences, make sure that you are 100,000% in a space to hear them and not get triggered into a defensiveness or in any way be like, oh, well, that's not, or just dismissing their story. That's actually more harmful than helpful. Also, I think sometimes when people are meaning to be helpful, they want to offer how not racist they are, or how they're always helping, or, you know, I don't see color, any of those things. They're ultimately just asking that person who you were perhaps meaning to be listening to affirm you and tell you how good you are and how great you are, which is not the same as powerfully listening and taking in. So I would offer that up. I would also say that there are so many free resources. My anti-racism school I charge for. One of the things as you do your anti-racism work is starting, no doubt, from when enslaved people, but when that was a normal thing in this country. Many, again, it's systematic. It's what we've seen on TV. It's what we've seen in the movies. It's what we've read in the books. It's what our great ancestors were 100% used to. So like removing any form of shame from who and where we are now, but understanding that there's this idea that, you know, Black and brown people are supposed to serve, just unconscious bias, for lack of better terminology. So the idea of, let me be very specific. I had a friend who I love very much, but we're not terribly close. We haven't worked together in years. And, you know, he called me right after the George Floyd and the racial reimagining really began. And he was like, what do I do? I want to go to my company and I want to present a plan to leadership. So like, can you just carve out an hour for me and we'll just come up with a complete plan and I'll bring it to my bosses and maybe they'll like it. And I just want to invite you to join me in thinking like, so I'm supposed to donate all of my time and talent for free, of course, for my friend, so that he has the opportunity to present to his bosses, which they may or may not be at all interested, but that feels like a lot of donating of time and effort that I wasn't willing to sign up for. Of course, there's a bazillion free resources, and I will list some of them for you shortly, but I would encourage you to not unwittingly ask Black or brown friends to do your work for you. And so anytime you are wanting to do a deep dive in your anti-racism work, White Fragility's book gave a great explanation of, just imagine if a doctor walked in and was like, wow, there's this disease you have. It's a big deal. It's called such and such. And you said, wait, what's it called? And the doctor said, well, it's called, and then they said this weird name that you were like, okay. And then they ran out of the room for an emergency. You would probably get on Google and you would probably reach out to all your friends immediately being like, have you heard of this? What can I do about this? You would probably be proactive in finding out information. And so I want to invite everyone to do that. You're here listening, by the way. Thank you. This is how it's done. Let's just go through some free resources really quick. Here's another book I highly recommend, How to Be an Anti-Racist. However, weird but true. I want to like marry How to Be Anti-Racist to My Grandmother's Hands. And I will offer, especially for the Warrior Goddess training community, if you're only going to read one book, if you're white identifying, start here, because I think it will help you come to a space where you can really listen and hear deeply and truly, which if you're not able to really hear, that's you know, we need that. I recently heard, hurt must be heard before it can be healed. I'll say again, hurt must be heard before it can be healed. And if you're only going to read one, start with White Fragility. But after that, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem is magnificent, specifically because it talks about the traumas stored in our body. So for Black and brown bodies, but specifically talking about Black, think of, you know, slavery, but also what so many people forget, the white bodies that came over, the 13 colonies, were traumatized. Nobody left. Was it King George? I'm always mixing up my historical figure names, but the 13 colonies came complete with trauma. It was not like a picnic, joyful, let's move to America because I hear they have wonderful flowers. It wasn't that. It was a full escape. And there was a full revolution filled with bloodshed and dead bodies and trauma. So it makes even more sense when you factor in the trauma element that the white settlers, the 13 colonies, the original 13 colonies, these traumatized humans would then share their trauma with the Native Americans on this land who've lived here for 14,000 years peacefully. It would make sense that these traumatized white bodies from the original 13 colonies would inflict trauma on the Black bodies that they enslaved. It doesn't excuse anything, but like hurt people. And when you factor in the trauma component that has been the poison in this country's people, all of our people, for far too long, I think that that is where this work is so potent and powerful because it's not just trying to think our way out of trouble. It's using our body as guide and compass to feel our way out. I want to keep this shorter so that it's more, I guess, digestible. So I'm going to start to wrap up, but I want to offer being uncomfortable is a really great sign that you are making progress. There's no room for perfection in anti-racism work. Perfection is an illusion, and it is going to trigger shame or I'm not doing it right thoughts or consideration. The only guarantee, if you are committed to being a part of our collective human healing, is that you're going to learn a lot and you're going to be uncomfortable. And I think that one of the gifts that I liked about Warrior Goddess training, and I hope you do too, is there's sort of this idea of like normalizing discomfort. Discomfort just means we're stepping into growth. We are learning. We can slow down. We can tune in. And we can literally like expand our hearts first and then our mind into like a new consciousness. I think Einstein talked about we can't solve a problem at the same level that it was created at. So it's like we've got to rise up and be at a new level to solve. So if you feel uncomfortable and triggered, that is a perfect time to slow down, tune in. If you are white identifying and committed to anti-racism work, it's a perfect time to connect with someone else who you know is also committed to doing anti-racism work so that they're going to like lovingly hold you accountable and yet support you. Like finding nourishing support that keeps us on task from a place of love, not from a place of shame, not from a place of trying for perfection, but from a place of seeking to hear and understand, and then trusting our inner wisdom that we will know the next right step from there. Anti-Racism School is open. That's my course. If it's interesting to you, you can check out, if you go to antiracismschool.com, it will flip you right to my website. So you can either sign up for that or you can sign up for my mailing list for more information. I promise to give some free resources. Me and my mailing list, number one, free resources. I've been doling stuff out also on Facebook. I'm Serena Hicks, Serena Hicks Visibility Coach, because I help people who've been maybe hiding in plain sight to show up and live and play full out. Ibram X. Kendi, he has so many free offerings. Rachel Cargill has a bunch of free offerings. Layla F. Saad, she has the book and workbook, Me and White Supremacy. But I think my reigning favorite, because of the focus of trauma and body and healing the trauma in our bodies, would be Resmaa. You can Google My Grandmother's Hands, Resmaa Menakem. I share a lot of his stuff and podcasts he's done in my mailing list, but I would highly recommend them as free, robust free resources, by the way, if you'd like to do a deeper dive. I definitely touched on a bunch of things. I hope that's helpful. Heather, are there any questions that I could?
Oh my God, it's beautiful. That was so clear. And I just want to share, yes, it's landing. Thank you for pointing out the connection between talking about racism and talking about money. I'd never thought of that. So that was a big one for
connected. Good. I didn't talk about this, so thank you for prompting that, and thank you to whoever shared that. Anti-racism work is I think it's the ultimate abundance work. It is ultimately requiring each of us, me as a biracial, brown, not white, not black person, all of us, to believe, not just say it, believe that there's more than enough for each of us. Believe we can create a new way. We have to. Abundance is a real popular word. I'm into it too. But anti-racism work requires us to believe it's not a zero-sum game. That we are able to create something that all of us thrive in our own ways together. And that's one of the reasons I'm like, wow. Why
it's all connected.
Talk about these things? Exactly. Why are we not supposed to talk about women and sexuality? Why are we not supposed to talk about all the things? And I'm like, We're going to talk about that.
I see you. I got it.
Right? I'm like, sorry, can't be quiet. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, not sorry. Not sorry. Someone else wrote, thank you for the examples and info about resources is so helpful. Much appreciated. Learning so much these days. I shared all the resources on the chats.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth said, thank you so much, Serena. Khalid, lots of yay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Heather Ash. I know that when it very first started, I was like, no. So thank you for when you sent the email. And I was like, yes, I have. Thank you. Thank you for all the work that you've put out. And thank you for demonstrating. Oh, my final offering as far as your anti-racism work. And remember, permission to do it wrong. We're here to learn and grow and do better, not be perfect or get it right. There's no getting it right. It's much like similar to the Warrior Goddess training, and that it's about we do the work for ourselves. But we also know that when we shine our light, we're giving other people permission unconsciously. Like when they see us thriving and allowing ourselves to be imperfect, allowing ourselves to be different, allowing ourselves to be on our journey, like we're unconsciously giving them permission as well to find their way and not be victim to perfection ideas or how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think this is such a important piece because I've been in several white caucuses and organizations that are working with white people right now to help them unpack. And a lot of what people are saying is like, I haven't done anything before because I didn't want to make a mistake. I didn't know what to do. And that's one of the biggest questions I get of like, what do I do? And I'm like, go Google it. There's a million things to do. Read the book, start there. Stop asking. Like ask good questions, but take action. That's what's so important.
Yes, because when we think that we need to know exactly what we're doing before we get started, we don't get started.
Exactly. So we must get started. And there's so many resources. Your anti-racism school is a big resource and is so grateful for you that you took, because I know that was a big step out of what you've been doing in your life and from your deepest heart of wanting to share what you've learned growing up, and that you're in such you're a bridge because you've had both experiences of being, I mean, that was such a powerful story you shared of here's my experience with my white mama, here's my experience with my papa, totally different. And people that are white especially don't understand there's a difference because they're like, everybody's nice to me.
Right, which is one of the things that I think, thank you. That's when I was like, oh, some of our most powerful work is not our most convenient work. Got it. Yes. My experiences with my white cousins rolling in with my mom. I got pulled over once driving my mother's Lexus. Her seat was reclined. She was sleeping in the passenger seat. And we got pulled over and the cop was yelling, get out. And she like sat up and he was like, oh, sorry, this car was stolen. And it would, please.
Oh.
Saw a brown girl. I wasn't speeding because that was our first question. Were you speeding? And I'm like, no, because I'm terrified of my mother. I was not speeding. It was broad daylight. But it was a brown woman, younger, in a nice gold Lexus, and I get pulled over and he's yelling, get out of the vehicle. Like, they don't even do that. They don't do that to white people. Right. And that was even for me, it's like, oh. Because I was like, I don't know. And my mom was like, that's not a thing. They come to your door. You're like.
They ask you for your driver's license politely. My experience as a white person, very different.
And as well, because I live all of these different worlds. So yes, it feels like an honor and a privilege to get to be who I am. And I hope that also, for any white people who are considering, like, I hope you understand, I don't just like white people. I am your people as well. Like my mom's white, my granny's white. Like, I get it. How do you know what you don't know? You can't until you're like, oh crap, tell me more. And yeah, that's where I feel like it's such a powerful moment in time. I have never felt more truly and deeply before that, like, oh, we are ready. We are ready to do this work that all of our ancestors couldn't.
Yeah, I so agree. And I feel like the trauma piece, like when Resmaa, I just watched Resmaa and Robin DiAngelo I cried the whole time. I mean, it was just epic. And it was so beautiful. And when I first heard about Resmaa and that he was doing trauma work, I'm like, okay, we're going to do it this time. We're going to do it this time because of that piece. It just feels like, right?
Because the trauma, when we feel triggered, I remember the first time I was called the N-word. It was, well, as an adult teenager, but that's the trauma. when a white person is afraid of being called racist because racism is bad and they didn't want to be, that's the, and it's like, okay, when we can get ourselves past that triggered, freezing, freak out response and use our brains in service to our hearts and our values, now we are going to do the work. And then I get geeked out because I'm like, this is why coaching, this is why warrior goddess training, this is why we can do what those before us were not actually prepared and didn't have enough tools.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
I'm like, let's do it. Let's bring us all together so we can all be more loving.
Absolutely. So everyone, Serena's anti-racism school starts today, tomorrow.
Info. It's info, and then we have 2 calls a week for live coaching, and I'm not recording them for the safe space. I know that some people want to, but they're like, I don't love the idea of being recorded inside. Yeah. Not recorded. There's 2 a week, which means if you can make one of those days work once a week, there's live coaching and community. And as you know so well, and as I love, and as most of your listeners know, being in community, we hear people have the same fears. We have the same thoughts. And I think that again, dissolves some of the shame when it's like, that's not just me. That's okay. Now we're all going to work through it together.
Yeah, so important. And I really, what you said about the shame is so critical. And that's why I'm so happy that you're doing this work and holding the container, because I do also believe that's why so many white people especially are afraid of this work, is the guilt and the shame that comes up immediately, and having the tools and the support and the safe space to let that clear out so then we can actually do the work.
Yes.
You can't do the work if you have shame and guilt.
Shame shuts us down.
You just can't.
It shuts us down. It's it's the devil's work. Shame like shuts down all progress. And for that reason, it's like, let's just take it as a sign that we are ready to do better. That we want to be like, nope, don't have time for that.
Yes. Yeah. But it is time. So I'm putting up, look what I just discovered, a button that I can add anti-racism school to the. So
Thank
good.
you.
Yay. So there y'all go. Aang says, love this. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, thank you so much, Serena. So much gratitude to you. Many blessings as you step into holding the container for more healing. Please, please, please let me know how I can continue to support you in your beautiful work. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us, and take good care, dear ones.
Thank you.
Bye.